you can now see on screen, and we're ready to go with the first session of Block 4, the Young Learner session of ELTOC Chapter 5. And I'm delighted to introduce someone who I have known for many years, because we have worked together, we did used to work together for many years for International House. So Jane's ELT career spanned over 25 years. She's worked as a Director of Studies and Teacher Training Coordinator at International House Porto and specialised in teaching English and younger learners, in which she has a master's degree from York University. For 10 years, Jane worked as part of the academic management training at the International House Newcastle, and as well as teaching, was heavily involved in running CELTA, Delta, and CLIL methodology courses. Wow, busy. In 2020, Jane completed her PGCE and has since been teaching in primary schools in the northeast of England. This ELTOC session on classroom management, and I've seen it because I've rehearsed with her, so I know it's going to be fabulous. Jane, over to you. Enjoy your session.
Thank you very much, Sean. Welcome, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here and to see so many people from all over. It's just amazing. So this morning we're going to talk about managing group work and developing collaboration skills. So the first thing I'd like you to do is have a write down some questions. You can put them in the chat box, or you can just keep a hold of them somewhere else if you want to. Write down what questions you'd like answered by the end of this session. I'd be really interested to know what you would like to get out of the session, and then we can look back at them and see if we did actually manage to answer them. Oh, it's lovely to see everyone being so welcoming. But if you could just write down a few questions, and let's see if your agenda is the same as my agenda. Oh, someone's got a black screen. I wonder if they can be helped. So some of the questions I've got that I thought that you might want to write down are, we'll go to the next screen. Yeah. I've got some questions now coming. How to manage large classes of boisterous 9-year-old. Yes, that's it. I know exactly where you're coming from on that one, having worked in primary schools for the last couple of years. Pair work, not pair work. Yes. How to make everybody work in the things. These are really good questions that you're getting down. How to encourage students to engage. I'm hoping that you can answer this. Yes, there's lots of good questions. How to cope with lazy, rude students in groups. Hopefully we'll get to those. And if I don't answer those questions, you can pop them back into the question and answer the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer them afterwards. Okay. These are the questions I've written down for what I'm going to cover in the class anyway, in this session. So what group work tasks should I do? How do I set up group work? Which I think somebody's asked that. How can I manage expectations in the tasks? I think that's part of getting those kids involved and dealing with the boisterous children. What should I include in the plan? Did anyone write that? And how do I know if it's successful? How do we gauge the success of pair work? Okay, so how to encourage students to speak out, all of those questions. Let's get started for real. So my first section would be selecting a group task, because that's where it starts, isn't it? What are we going to do? What task do you want to do? So where can you go and find them? So there are usually tasks in course books. Now, all the examples I'm using today are coming from Beehive, the new series from OUP, and they have a fantastic section at the end of each lesson almost called Team Up, which are group tasks. Now, if you haven't done group tasks before, they're a really good way of starting because it'll guide you how to do them as well. But there's always places to look at, always tasks to get from the course book if you look, there's other resources, you know where you can find them. Sometimes you just come up with them as well. But first place of port of call to look is tasks in your course book. The other thing you need to consider is it a task that you have done before? If you know the task that you're going to do, you know what the pitfalls are, you know how to adapt it for your students. If you haven't done it before, then you're going to have to look at it a little bit more closely and work out what you need to do in order to make it successful. The other thing is, have the children done a similar task? Now, if they have done the task or a similar task, you need to be a little bit firmer. They might think they know what to do, but they don't. So this is something, or it's going to use different language, something that you really need to consider. Have they done it before? How can you adapt it? And the final one would be, do they have the language to complete the task? There's no point in trying to do a task if they haven't. Don't just choose a task because it's of the same topic. For example, if you've spent a whole lesson talking about animals of some sort and you think, oh, I can do this task, but they use a completely different set of animals, different language. Got to make sure that it all fits in. And for me, that's where we would start planning backwards. Choose your task, the group task that you want them to do, and start with that in your planning, and then work back and say, well, if I've got this task I want them to complete in their groups, what language do they need? What vocabulary do they need? And start from that and plan backwards in order to feed everything in so that it makes a whole complete lesson. So that's things that you need to consider when selecting a group task. Here is an example of some materials from Beehive. Have a look at this. What game could you play? Would you like to write in the chat box there? So what we have, we've got a picture of a doctor, a pilot, a vet, a scientist, a chef, a sports coach, and a shop assistant. And then there's some pictures of their places of work. So what game could you play with those? Yeah, so guessing game, a describing game, professions, storytelling, that's a good one. Lots of guessing games, match and memory game. There's so many, aren't there, of matching and memory games. Guess who fits it in? Absolutely. Whoa, you're going so fast, I can't read everything. Matching the job to the place. The memory card game. We've only got 6 pictures to match to 6 places of work, 6 jobs to match to the places of work. So it's still at Beehive 2, level 2, I think, or level 3. I can't remember. Pelmanism. Oh, I love the word pelmanism. Yes, it's just another word for the memory game or pairs game. So it's the memory game. Here's the instructions. Cut out the cards, play the games with your friends. Separate the cards into jobs, places of work, put them face down, they choose one, try and match it. And if they match, then they win that pair. I think many of us have played this so many times. Yes. There's also a little dialogue here. She's a scientist. She doesn't work at the hospital. Never mind, your turn. He's a pilot. He works in the plane. Okay. So what problems do you think you would have if you set this up? Considering what your objective would be for them to have this conversation. She's a scientist. She doesn't work in a hospital. Okay. What problems do you think you might have if you were trying to set up a memory game? They would definitely play in groups or pairs. Memory games usually played in pairs, maybe 3, maybe 3s. not in large groups. When there's only 6 cards like this to match to another 6 cards, it's definitely a pair work. Not on their own, because there's no conversation for them to have. Okay, so problems could be lack of grammar, not speaking in English, lack of vocabulary, using the first language, yes, providing them appropriate. You need to make sure that they've got the language before you do it. I think it's a little confusing too, Linda, mainly because not all the pictures are, it comes straight from the course book, so they would have been presented with this. You might need to remind them what the pictures actually are. You know, how can you tell the difference between a doctor and a vet? Maybe the images are a little bit clearer in real life, or they've matched very closely to what's going on in the course book. One of the problems I think you might have with this is that the kids' objective would be to get their pairs and to win the game. Our objective as a teacher would be for them to practice the language as much as possible. Having that little conversation. She's a scientist. She doesn't work in the hospital. Never mind. In all realities, I don't think that conversation's going to happen as much as we want it to. So therefore, you've got to try and encourage that a little bit more. So making sure they know it's not, the objective is not just winning the cards, but using the language. So if you've got point system of some description, you might award children points for using the language. I think so as well. Right, we're going to move on to another one. Ooh. So again, we've got a very similar one, very similar, but at a higher level. And these are to do with a conversation to have about the theatre. The pictures are the same, but they've got an adjective added at the bottom. So again, similar games to play. I think you've come up with some really good ideas of how we can use these cards with role plays and stories. And I think that's about adapting the materials that you've got to suit your class. So if you look at these tasks from the course book, but you think, are they really going to have this conversation? Why don't we do something else? Use the materials, but adapt them and come up with stories and role plays. I think that's brilliant. Yes, we're matching these nouns with these adjectives. But again, it's still our memory game, a pair game. There's more cards because they are at a higher level. So the objective of the game is for them to talk as if they've been to the theatre the day before. So yesterday at the theatre, what was the play like? It was amazing. So they're still matching the cards. They're still playing Pellman as a memory game, pairs, whatever you want to call it. The language is different. The structures are different. I think this is something you really need to try and get them to use, is focus on is the language that you want them to use while they're playing the games. So then, although they are so focused on what the game is and the task is, you're going to be focused on the language, and you've got to get them focused on the language as well. What I used to do when I've got groups like this, if they were working with this one, I think they would work in sort of pairs or maybe threes, is put one of them in charge to make sure that they're going to use the English. I would call them the English captain. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the strongest in the pair or the group, but just someone who's just keep doing your job and saying, got to say it in English. We've got to do it like this. Well, someone just said about the colours being in black and white. I think that's just for the ease for teachers to photocopy more than anything. Plus, you don't want to spend a lot of time making all of these cards, colouring them, getting it all coloured and cutting out. How long is this going to last? Are you going to use those cards again? Can they take them home? Think about all of those at the same time. Okay. So this, as you say, this was really linked to the book, because those adjectives, sometimes you'd go, why would I use that adjective? you needed to see what was happening in the book. So I think my point here is when you're choosing a task, if it's come from a course book that you're not using, you might not have the right language, or they might not have the right language to do it. You might need to look at the course book to go, oh, that's what it is. That's what I had to do with this one. I looked at the task first, and then I was like, oh, not sure. Need to look what's going on in the course book. The course book has got everything in there ready for you and sets it all up. That's how they link so well. Okay, so let's talk about setting up group work. Okay, so when we're setting it up, I believe when you, as you've registered for this, you're going to get the classroom management pack that I've just been working on. And here's a little bit from it, some pictures from it, so which will help you with setting up group work. So something you need to, excuse me, something you need to think about would be, have they worked in groups before? Do you want to choose the groups? If you've never done this, and I know a lot of teachers are a little bit scared about doing pair work and group work, because it means that you have to lose control of the class temporarily, and you have to then try and get it back again. Okay, so if you've never done group work or pair work, start small, give them a little bit of freeway, then pick it back up again. Okay, so that's something you might need to really consider. Then the next thing you need to consider is, do you want to choose who's working together and who isn't? More to the point, who you don't want to work together. Do you want to choose the groups or not? So there are some advantages and disadvantages of letting them work with the people they want to work with. What do you think the disadvantages are of letting them choose their own groups? Really does depend on your class, the relationship you have with them, the relationship they have with each other as well. Yeah, Amma says, yes, I want to choose. Why do you want to choose that? Why do you want to be in charge of choosing? Yeah, a lot of them will just choose to be with their friends, and then they may mess around. They'll start talking a bit more. Absolutely. You might have some stronger groups. You might have some weaker groups. So it really depends. They want to have fun, and you want them to have fun as well, but they also need to do the task that you've set. It's all going too fast, can't see. Yeah, their friendship might impede their effectiveness if they choose their own groups. But at the same time, yeah, they might all speak their first language if you've got monolingual classes. Sometimes friends don't work well together. Sometimes they do. It depends on the task you're doing, what the objective of the task is, how long you want them to be in the group, what they're doing in the group. So here's some ideas of how you could set up group work and getting them into groups. If you wanted to get them, say you had 20 children in the class and you want to get 4 groups of 5, the easiest thing to do would just to be count children 1 to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You are one group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're another group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another group. That would be the easiest. Then another way of doing it would be to give them all numbers and go around the class and just go 1, 2, 3, 4. Give them all a number up to 4, because you only want 4 groups. Then you say all the 1s together, all the 2s together, all the 3s together, all the 4s together. Now that can be a little bit confusing, because actually when you're numbering them, you're just giving them a name. The easiest thing to do would be to use colours and just maybe go around red, blue, yellow, green, red, blue, yellow, green. You could even give out pens, coloured pens to each child, get them to hold up who's got a red pen, who's got a green pen, get all the reds together, all the greens together, all the blues and all the yellows. You have more control then of who's going to work with who. Because if you've got, let's say you've given out all the pens, everyone hold up your red pen, you can quickly see, do I want those two to work together? Oh, change those, red and the yellow, change it. Everyone with yellow pen, put your hand up. Okay, yeah, I think they'll work okay. Everyone with blues, greens, good. Now go into your corners, reds, blues, yellows, greens. Getting them into their groups. It's being efficient like this in your management of group work that makes the group task more successful. Okay. So girls had the idea of just putting the colours in the box. If you already know you've got 20 children and you've got 20 pens in of the different colours, letting them pick them out without looking could do, that's very random, Gail. You could do that. But you can name them and use your own imagination here. I'm just trying to give you some ideas of how to do it. You can just use where they're sitting. If you only want them to be in a group or pair for a short time, maybe just playing that matching game, it's not worth getting them all up and changing places and moving around. Just do it where you're sitting. If you want them to be in a group to do some project work, or if you want them to be in a group where you're having a little competition between groups, this is when you want to get them moving and moving around. If you're really well organised, you could pre-arrange the groups and have decided who is going to be. So you're calling out the names because you know that you want them to do that. Again, this would be if you were doing a much bigger sort of project that might be there might be their group for two lessons or something. Or if they were, again, doing something a bit more constructive, you might want to make sure that you've got somebody who's good at the language, somebody who might be good at drawing, someone who's, depending what you're doing, you might have that pre-arranging, call it, so you could, with their names. And every group, if you're getting them into groups of 5 for a reason, because they're doing a project, because they're having a little competition, I think you'd need to give them names, name those groups. Not necessarily if you were just doing something very quick or they're working together in one group, playing a game or a task as a group, they don't need to have a name then. But if they're working in a sort of team against team, then it's easier to have group names. Or if they're working on a bigger project, a group name. How would you name those groups? This is, I just put this in for a bit of fun. How would you name the groups? What would you just let them say? Oh, come up with a name for your group. Which they might do, and they might come up with quite really good names. I like to just take their initials and try and make a word out of their initials. And if you can't get a word, then make up one. Make up a word. I mean, this is how ABBA was named, isn't it? Lots of pop groups are named just by taking their initials or using their initials in a fun way. Like there might be 3 J's and 2 H's or something, 3J, 2H, something like that. So they've got a little code, a code name for their group, which is then quite personal to them. You could even get them to come up with their own little chant or something. Again, it depends on what you're doing in the group. So see what ideas you've got. Giving group names, make them create their own group names. Yeah, I think you can use your creativity. Yeah, they could be called after animals. Again, it depends on the task that you're doing, doesn't it? I like come up with something really original that only they've had, which is using their initials. I just think it makes it quite personal, doesn't it? Yeah, they can be named after their superheroes, or use an adjective and a name and a superhero or whatever, just to try and get a little bit more language in there. You know, someone suggesting you can get random name pickers for their groups, but yeah, puzzles and stuff. Okay, some great ideas there. To name them after the Avengers, absolutely. Whatever they're interested in, you've got to make sure that it's something that's motivating them to be in that group. Right. So, yeah, we have a class dojo for quick work as well, things like that. So now we're just going to move on and talk about staging the task. So we've setting up our group work, we've set up our groups, and now we're going to set up the work in the group. So one of the things you need to do is make sure you stage the tasks, that you're not just going straight forward and saying, oh, what we're going to do today is we're going to make this thing and we're going to do it like this and that. Off you go. That's not going to help. Staging the task. So tell them one task at a time, one instruction at a time. Make sure you know what you are going to do. Okay. You'll get in the classroom management pack, there will be some classroom instruction flashcards, and there's also instructions on how to use those as well. Again, something that I've been working on with OUP. Use the instruction flashcards, put them up so that they know in what order they're going to do stuff. Use all the ideas there to help you as well. I'm not going to go through it now, but there's plenty in there for you to read about. So here's another activity, and we're going to look at the stages. I think this was from Beehive 1. So you can see the objective here is for the children to line up youngest to oldest. But here's the stage. First stage. When's your birthday? Circle the month and write the date. So that's the first thing they need to do. Circle that month, write the date. Some of them might not know it. You might need to just check. Presumably you will have already been teaching the months up until this point. This is the whole point of it. Yes, write these steps and stages on the board. Get them. This is what they're doing individually. So they're going to work by themselves at this point so that they know what they are going to say. You might get them to practice saying it as well. As they've circled the month and written the date, you might just get them to go round and make sure they know how to say June the 12th, November the 13th, whatever it is when their birthday is. Second thing is you're going to get them to practice the conversation that they will have. How old are you? I'm 8. Me too. When's your birthday? It's on the 3rd of March. When's your birthday? On the 5th of April. You're older than me. Stand here. How old are you? I'm 7. Oh, you're the youngest. Stand here. This little conversation, this little dialogue that they're going to have, or you expect them to have. Okay, so you need to think about what instructions you would give. What instructions would you give? Okay, write in the chat box how the exact words that you would say of how you would get them to have this conversation. Someone's saying they're doing this activity right now. That's brilliant. One of the absolute pitfalls with this, one of the pitfalls for trying to get children from youngest to oldest, if they were one of them will just go, well, I know I'm one of the youngest, I'm going to stand here. And the next one, well, I know I'm the oldest, I'm going to stand here. I know my birthday's. And they would go to the position where they think they should be without saying anything. Again, their objective is to, because you've told them, is to line up youngest to oldest. Your objective, though, would be for them to practice this conversation and get them used to saying, when's your birthday? It's on da da da. So how can we get them to practice that without them just going straight to their line? Yeah, let me see some of the things. Short, simple instructions, writing their birthday down. See if you've put anything else. Oh. So the first thing I would do is to get them to practice this in a smaller group. So in their group of 4 or 5, practice moving where they're going. If they've done it in a smaller group first to practice the language, then when they stand up to do the whole class, it'll be easier. They'll have more confidence to do it. So they practice it in a group of 4 or 5 and get them to stand in their youngest or oldest line. Next, you need to give them a really clear instruction that if they don't speak, if they don't ask, they can't move. So they can only move if they've asked the person next to them when their birthday is, and then they swap places according to if they're younger or older. And they keep doing that. So they need to practice that conversation several times and swapping as they go. Yeah. Okay. And the final bit, let's have a look. The final stage of that one is to play the lineup. So once you've given them all of those preparations and staged all of those tasks, then you can get them to play the lineup game, oldest to youngest. Any comments? Any questions? I will plod on. Right. So now we're talking about managing the expectations. Someone had a question about this earlier. How to manage all of those tasks, especially when you've got kids who are very chatty and want to move around a lot. One of the things that you will get in the classroom management pack would be this B stars together poster. So you can use this to help you set out expectations and the routines that you're going to use. You've got to have these routines embedded in them. For example, if you raise your hand, you don't say anything. If you raise your hand, they see your hand raised, they're just going to stop everything, raise a hand and be quiet so that you can pull them back together again or give them further instructions. Release. That's got to happen. You've got to be really strict about it, because there'll be children who'll put their hand up but continue their conversation because they don't want to actually acknowledge that what this hand up means. But you've got to be very strict about it and call them out and do it. So setting up our expectations, we can use the B stars together. Again, you've got loads of instructions in the pack on how to use it, but we'll have a quick look. You'll notice on the B stars together, it doesn't actually say speak in English, mainly because that's a given, that their objective should be to try and use English all the time. You can't say don't speak your own language at all. That's not realistic. But to use as much English as they can, yes, but that's already a given. This B stars poster is about working in groups. So we have another little example here from Beehive 3, where they're going to make a city tour leaflet. So you'll put them into groups of 4 or 5, and each person's going to do some writing to make a little leaflet. So they definitely need to be in a group, in a team, with a little name, creating this document together. So let's have a quick look at how we can use this B stars with this task. What do you think? How would you set up and use the B stars together in order to use this task, to get them to do this task, creating the leaflet? What's it called? The holiday leaflet. Oh, it's about their town, I think. Again, it links straight directly to Beehive and what they're doing. Oh, I'm missing all these questions down here. Somehow I've lost my chat box and I missed everything. Oh.
You okay, Jane?
Yeah. I've done something on my chat and then I didn't realise I had all those questions which I could have been answering earlier. Never mind. I'll look back at them later. Thanks, Sean. So how would you use this B stars with this task? If I quickly go through them. So the B focus just means stay on task. The E, explain your ideas to your group, okay, of what you want to do. Sharing your ideas, taking turns, making sure that they all take turns. Ask questions to each other, respecting each other's ideas so that they accept what the other person's saying and they validate all of the ideas. And stay together. That final one is about working with their group and not going off and talking to their friends. Okay, not all of those will be relevant to all of the group work that you do. So you might just need to highlight which ones you want to do or which ones you want to work with. Yeah. Getting them to think. Absolutely. Asking the questions to the person. I think it's really important that when they do work as a group, that they are collaborating on something like this, when they're making a leaflet together, that they are talking together. Does it matter if they're explaining their ideas in their own language? No. Does it matter if they're using their first language just to talk about how they want to set it out? No. As long as they're trying to use English and that the end product is written in English, that's what's important. That's what we want them to do. But I think if we just say you can only speak English, you'll just have them sitting there not taking turns, not contributing, because some of them are not going to have the language, especially when they're little, using it like this. Okay. Yeah, reading all these instructions, getting them to go to other groups to help. They can. I often get them to, if they're working in groups and they're doing something like that. So, oops, sorry, I've gone too far. If they're working in groups and they get stuck with ideas, I might send one of them out as a little spy, and just say, just go and have a quick look around. You don't need to talk to the other groups, but just go and see what they're doing. See if you can go and take some ideas to work on. Okay, so just be a spy. So get them just to walk past, but without actually looking, but looking. Yeah, so they quite like doing that. Send a spy out from each group just to try and get more ideas. Right, so while we're managing the tasks, you're monitoring how the groups are working. You are there assisting those who need more instructional support. Maybe they haven't quite understood what you want them to do. That's what you're doing while they're working. you're assisting those who might need language support, perhaps, especially if they've come to writing in that handout, in that leaflet, they might need a little bit of guidance of what to write. And you may want to adjust the task depending on how mixed abilities, your low achievers and your high achievers. You want to set your high achievers some higher expectations. One of the problems where you have a differentiated by outcome task is that the higher achievers can just sit there and go, oh, well, I'll just do the minimum amount of work. And it's right, it's all good, it's right, but they're not being pushed. So you might need to just adjust that task, saying, right, well, I think you could write this, this, and this. Okay. For the low achievers, you might, again, adjust it the other way. I'll be really happy if you just did this and you could write this sentence. So that's part of monitoring and managing the tasks as you're going through. Absolutely. Someone just said, should we assign a group leader? I think so. Again, I might just call them the English captain to make sure. It generally happens naturally when you've got group work like this, that they will be working. One of them will sort of take a little bit of control. It's often good to give the not the strongest in English, but someone who's not, the opportunity to change the group leaders as often as possible. Not within the task, but each time you do a different task, make sure somebody else has a go at being the leader and deciding and just accepting who's doing everything. Right. Oh, I think we're running out of time, aren't we, Sean?
Yeah, there are 19 minutes left of the session, Jo.
Okay. Right, we'll quickly go on. Okay. Here's another quick activity where they're going to make a little book. I'm not sure if you can read what's on this book. Again, you're getting them into groups. And they just have to do a gap fill. Now, the question I've got here is, what is the target language for this group task? Can anybody see what the target language is? I need to just have a quick drink. What target language do you think they would be doing in creating this storybook? It's quite a nice little activity where each child in the group completes one page. They get to colour it in, but they need to do the gap fill for that book, for that page. It's an interesting one. Yeah, you can't see it. Neither can I, if I'm honest. It's interesting. It's actually to do with possession. So I've got, I haven't got. But it's not like a normal gap fill where all of the gap fills would be have got or haven't got. Some of them would be with the nouns. So it really consolidates all the language of the previous lessons. It was at the end of a unit. So they need to know everything. Yeah, I understand you can't see it. There are some verbs, there are some nouns. It's a little bit of everything. Means that you can then differentiate and give the person who perhaps you think, oh, needs this, they need to practice this bit, I'm going to give them this page. The other person needs to practice the other thing, they'll give them that page. Yeah, it takes a lot of management for this. But my question really would be, how could you get more language into the task? So at the moment, they're looking at their dialogue in the storybook and they can complete one word, maybe two, in the gap fill. So how could you get more language into that? I'm not sure if we're going to have time to, or I should just go on rather than things. I'm going to go on. So for me, when we're doing, wrong one. When we're doing activities like this, which are cutting and sticking, colouring in, things like that, the language of the task should be about the classroom language. So can I borrow a pencil, please? Have you got a blue I can use? Who's got the scissors? All of that language that they need when making a little book should be the language that you want them to use. And the only way they're going to use that language is if you teach it to them. Again, this is one of the posters from the classroom management pack that you'll be getting, and there's some information in there about how to introduce classroom language and how to use the classroom language while you're doing that kind of activity. Okay, here's a quick poll. Could we have our poll? Have you ever played bingo? Have you ever played bingo? Any kind of bingo, anywhere in the world. Surely bingo is one of the most global games, is it not? Oh, do I have to answer as well, Sean? I don't know. Anywhere you've been. Sean, I don't have access to my thing now.
What's the matter?
I've just got the poll on my screen.
So either answer the poll or do it later.
Ah, okay. I didn't realise I had to do it.
I push it out to everyone. Okay. So you should be able to see the poll on the screen now.
Oh, look, everyone, nearly everyone has played bingo. That's brilliant. Bingo's great. And do you play it in the classroom? Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Can I get back to this? Oh, poll is closed. Let's see what's happening. Yeah, your kids love playing bingo. It's such a good game. It's nice. Here we go. Next question then. Have you ever played bingo? So I found this one. Again, it's in a Beehive 5, so they're a bit more advanced. As you can see, we've got the present perfect now. So have you ever played bingo? Let's have a look at this game, this group activity. It's hard. Well, let's see. Is it even group activity? It's certainly collaboration skills. Here we go. Have you ever played bingo? You complete the have you ever questions on their bingo card using their own ideas or using some of the ones that they've got here. Have you ever arrived late for a flight? Have you ever forgotten your homework? So they've got to change those and put in their past participle, all of that. Then they go around and ask questions, taking turns to ask questions and answer. Yes, if they find someone who has, then they write their name in. If they find someone who hasn't, they move on. As soon as they've got a line of 3 or 3 squares, then they shout bingo. So, you might think you know bingo, but is this the same as bingo? How is it different? The main difference here, I'm going to answer the question for you. The main difference is that there isn't a caller. The teacher's not in charge. They're in charge. They're going round and completing this. So you're not calling out. They're doing all of the language. They're going round and asking each other the questions. So, and as soon as they've got a yes, they're writing the name of the person in. They are doing all of the work. It's really good to get as much language into the game as possible. Yeah, it's a mingle activity, isn't it? I think one of the difficulties might be is that if you're asking the questions, you're not answering the question. So you need to kind of make sure that if you ask a question, you've got to answer the person's question as well before you move on. Yeah, it's much more communicative than just bingo, which tends to just be language. So maybe you could take this idea and maybe use it for another activity that would in a different year group or a different level. Right, I'm just going to quick move on, setting it up. Right, we're going on to this one. Planning. Just want to check. So while we are planning our group activities, we need to make sure we have as much detail in our plan as possible. Stages of the tasks planned, the groupings, how you're going to get them into groups, it's planned. Time to get into the groups. It takes time, especially if they're little. The younger the group, and if they've never done it, you've got to allow for that time of getting them into a group. You need to plan what you're going to say, the exact words you are going to say. You need to plan what you are going to do, how you are going to do it. You need to plan what you want them to say, what you think they're going to say, and what you want them to do. Okay? You need to plan that time to tidy up and get back into wherever they need to do, to tidy up and get into a lesson if you're moving on or whatever. You need to plan that time to tidy up. And most importantly, you also need to plan time to reflect on what you've just done and learn from it. Did it work well? Yes. Why? How could you make it work well again? Did it not go very well? Why? What did you do? What did you say that didn't help? Change it. Your reflection on your group work is really important. And as it says there, the more detail you put in your plan now, the easier your life will be later, because you'll just learn. You'll just learn how to do it. The planning for group work is so important. I'm glad everyone's agreeing with me. You just need to, you're aiming for it to be automatic so that you can do everything without thinking. But that will only happen if you've planned in detail beforehand. The more you plan out of the lesson, the easier you can manage your lesson. Yes, good. So we'll just have a quick, how do we know if it's worked well? For managing the tasks, who worked well together? Who did you think worked really well together? You want them to work together again. Who didn't work well together? Who don't you want to work together again? You know what I'm talking about. You know, if there's some kids who you think, nah, there's no way I can put him and him together, or her and her. It's not always the boys. You know that they don't want to work together. Don't put them together. If they're not going to work together, don't put them. Evaluate how much language did you actually use in the activity. Was it a language full? It needs to be as full of language as possible. If it was just cutting and sticking in there, sitting there silently, that's not enough in a language lesson, I think. Did they complete the task? Did they complete the task successfully? Yeah. You need to think. And if they didn't, why? Was it because of your classroom management? Was it because of how you'd set it up? Or was it because they didn't have the language to do it? Then you needed to do more teaching beforehand before you can get onto it. Okay, so we had those questions at the beginning. I'm hoping we've managed to cover all of that. Yeah, thank you, Rosa, saying I'm right. It is the basis of everything. You need to plan that classroom language. You need to plan every little thing, I think. I used to always say every second of the lesson and every child of the lesson needs to be considered. So have we got time for our Q&As?
So Jane, you've got about 6 minutes for Q&A. There are a lot of questions because a lot of people, at the beginning, when you asked about questions,
okay,
a lot of people put questions in the Q&A.
So
if you click on the Q&A tab, you'll see them there.
Yeah.
And you probably need to do some scrolling. You've got 6 minutes. So you've got probably, depending on the length of the answers, 4 or 5 questions, I would guess.
Okay. So someone's saying, what if we don't have enough time to plan? You have to make time to plan. If you don't have enough time to plan, you're not going to have a successful activity. basically. You can't, this isn't something that you can just do without planning. You have to at least thought about something. At what level of the learner should either is L1, B2 during the instruction? I've been in lessons with children who have complete beginner, couldn't understand a word of English, and I've come out and just giving them English instructions. I've done just words, and they've come out and they've learnt. Their very first lesson would have been learning instructions to stand up, sit down, look, listen, repeat. And if that's all they learnt in their first lesson, that is so important, because that set them up for the rest of their language learning career. Instructions in English are really important. It's as I say in the classroom management pack, it's valuable because it's genuine communication, and they need it for the rest of their language learning life. All of their lessons are going to be like that. So from the beginning, use L1, I would say. I mean, use English. Can we help them if they need ideas? Of course you can. You don't want to be giving them tasks to do and then just sitting there going, but I don't know what to do. That's why I said, or maybe give them the little task of being a spy to go on to look at other groups. Give them the language they need. Give them some ideas. Yeah, you want them to be successful. You don't want them just to be sitting there frustrated. Yeah, I would make sure that they do, you're helping them as much as possible. If you're teaching English as a foreign language for young learners, is it okay to speak their language in class? I never, ever spoke when I was in Portugal for 15 years, and I never spoke Portuguese in the class. Like I've just said, all of the instructions, it's ideal situation and contextualized language for what you want them to do. Get them do it in English. You can break instructions down to use imperatives. You don't need to think about verb endings or anything. So you can get them to say, look, listen, read, answer. That's it. Whatever. Yeah. Why do you need to use their first language? I would say the only time you should speak the first language would be in an emergency. Any other questions? Has anyone else found a question that you think I should answer, Sean?
There are so many to go through.
For young learners,
I think it's
from Lama. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say, if there's one thread which you might not be able to answer, it's dealing with large classes. Large classes in there.
Yeah, managing group work in large classes of about 70 students from SAFA. Is that young learners, SAFA? Because that would sound horrific to me if it is. But managing group work, again, you just need to be really, really, really organised. It's possible to do it. Getting them into groups, you could just give them, if you wanted them to get into groups of 5, and you think it's going to take too long to go around and just count, give them all a number or a colour or whatever, just tell them to say, well, find 5 people who are wearing the same colour as you, something like that. Then they're all automatically got a reason for going around and getting into a group. Yeah. And then setting it up in exactly the same way. I think it's the grouping when you've got such large classes. But there's loads of different ways of getting them into groups that doesn't involve you being taking too much time. Lama said, for young learners, do we give them all the stages at once? Give them a step-by-step. Step-by-step, you want them to keep together. You don't want one group to be finishing and the others only on stage 2 of 5 or something. I would do it step-by-step, trying to keep them together as much as possible. You need to tell them what their overall objective is. what the main task is, but when you've broken it down one step at a time. So for example, you might say, today we're going to do the leaflet together. First thing I want you to do is think of a place that you want to write about. Next thing, what could you mention? Break it right down. Right down.
One more question.
Any suggestions?
I'm going to think a difficult one that you can't possibly.
Suggestions for toddlers, preschoolers, and kindergartens.
I'm sure you can probably handle those. There is, I guess I'm not sure if you've covered that. There is something about like the wording is in the questions, not mine, but like troublesome children or hyperactive children and things like that. I don't know if you've got a tip on that, because that's kind of a thread as well. Yeah.
When you've got difficult children or SEND children, you've got to make sure that they are doing something that they can actually do. So don't try to force them to do something if that's beyond their capabilities. Give them something that they can focus on. And if they aren't comfortable working in groups, just say, well, do you want to do it by yourself? Or this is about planning for your individual children in your class. Think of something that they could do away from everybody else. If they're not going to work as a group, they're not going to be able to work in pairs. Have that other activity for them, whether it's just sitting and doing something else. It could be something on an iPad or whatever. You've got something else for them to do so that they're not disrupting the rest of the group. Why should the rest of the group not do group work for one child? Yeah, so it's something like that, I would think. You're planning for individuals. Yeah, well, I better finish, I guess.
Thank you, Jane. That was great. I was just going to mention, throughout Jane's session, she brought up the classroom management pack. So we're just going to share a link to that in the chat so that you can all get your hands on it. It is so lovely. It's really pretty as well. All the images, it's so nice. So definitely, it's great. But thank you.
And with each poster and thing, there's an impact and implementation document as well. So it tells you not just how to use it, but why you should be doing the thing. So people who are asking about using their first language in giving instructions, it gives you all of that reasons why you shouldn't.
Thank you. So we've shared that a few times in the chat. You should be able to get hold of that now, and it's also in the handout section. So definitely head there and look into that. But thank you, Jane. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the lovely comments.